as I rush through all of this, but mostly what I would want to talk about, though, is what did I learn from making these games? So I usually go in there with some intention of like, this is what I'd like to do, work on it for a bit, and then realize maybe sometimes I meet the goals, sometimes I don't, but here's the lessons that I learned in that process along the way. So I'm just going to jump right into it. So the first game here, this hidden reindeer game, and this is when Jordan was 3 years old and Dylan was just 7 months old at the time. And my wife was setting up the Christmas decorations around the house. And of course, a 3-year-old wants to get into everything. So she's like, can you just keep him busy while I set up the Christmas stuff? I'm like, oh yeah, no problem. I'll maybe make a little game for him to play at the kitchen table. So we had these little reindeers here, these little wooden reindeers. And I got out some paints and we started painting them and just kind of a little activity. Like, well, this could be kind of a fun little, we could turn this into a game here. And since he's about at that age, 3 years old, it's like I might as well, as a proud parent, I might as well, teach him, test him. See, like, is he really as smart as I think he is? It's like, let's kind of like run him through the paces here and test his memory, test color recognition, just simple things like that. So here's the game that we came up with. We started out with just these little reindeer, and then we said, I'd be like, oh, which hand has the red reindeer? Which one has the green one? And over the course of playing for a couple hours, I started doing kind of like the 3-card Monty thing where I cut up some paper towel tubes and put the reindeers inside and juggled them around. And now where's the reindeer? And then I made these cylinders here, the white cylinders, and we'd mix and match between those. And so it just kind of evolved and just kind of grew. And it's a very simple thing. And as he kind of reached his limits of what I was talking about, like, can he find this? I'd add it, make it a little harder, and see where he'd break, basically, kind of like pushing him. It's a good parent thing to do to your kids. So, what did I learn? A very simple game. You think, oh, what lessons could be learned from just putting glitter glue on poster board? There's quite a lot, actually. So one thing that I realized is that the goal of the game is unimportant at this age. If you're a game designer, which most of you probably are, that's like the goal is really important. It's what should, it drives the player forward. It's why they're even in there. If you took away the goal, they would just flail. They wouldn't know what to do. But for a 3-year-old, it's like we weren't keeping score. There was no winner or loser. It was just kind of this activity that we were playing as we went along. And then I would modify it, and I would change. There would be a little mini goal, like find the reindeer, but there wasn't like this big you won event, and now let's put this game away. The other thing that I still take with me today when I'm working on all the games that I work on is pay attention to your audience. At EA, when we go to our, where we do the user testing room, and there's 2 video cameras, one on the screen and one on the face, and I prefer to look at the one that's on the face because you really get a good sense of the engagement, whether they're thinking, whether they're bored, like what they're doing there. And that's something, with kids, they're great at letting you know what they think. They don't mess around. If a 3-year-old, it's all there in the face. The other thing is it's okay to change rules and goals as needed. This is another kind of breaks with some normal traditions of game design, which is that, you define all this stuff and then you present it to the player and they're in this system that they have to follow. And this is like, no, you can change the stuff around, just mess with it. As long as the kid's engaged, as long as he's active, then everything's good. So that maybe would have been the end of it, except that my wife kept all of that stuff and put it in with the Christmas stuff. So by the time she was getting stuff out the next year for to set up for Christmas, she pulled out that reindeer game, which I'd forgotten about by that point. And that was early December. And she's like, oh, look, it's a tradition. Every year you can play this game with your kids. I'm like, this it's not really that great of a game. Like, it's not really that deep. And I'm like, but I like that idea. I like that thing of like, let's make this tradition. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this heirloom game this year. And the idea is like, instead of just paper and glitter glue, I'm going to carve it out of wood and paint it and make something that would last for generations. And, my kids would pass it on to their kids and so on. It would be this, great thing from Grandpa Stone way back when he made this. And so this is my idea at the time. Of course, I hadn't done anything yet. Because that previous game was more about like testing his mental capacities, this one I'm like, let's just do dexterity. He's 4 years old. Let's kind of see like how he manipulates things instead of a game just about pattern matching, things like that. So this was the game. You can tell how to play it already just by looking at this picture. It's little, fake fishing poles with a hook on the end made of metal, and then all the fish have these little magnets on their mouths. It took me a while to dig this one up out of my kid's toy chest when I wanted to take this picture. I found it kind of at the bottom there. And I pulled it out, and immediately everybody in the family wanted to play it. It was just like, oh, yeah, I got to play it. And, I mean, you might get this feeling, too, just looking at it, where it's like, yeah, look at all of that. I really want to play this game. It looks fun. There was no real rules to it. It was just, can you catch these fish? And, you've probably seen similar games made out of plastic at just Walmart. You might have had one when you were a kid. So the design lessons here that I found is that pieces are more important than rules. This goes against a lot of game designs game design theory, I'd say, where it's like you figure out all your rules, you get them perfect, and then when you're all done, what you do is you make pieces that match the rules. And I found, the opposite is better. Like, if you make really great pieces, then you can just make games out of those pieces over and over again. As long as the pieces are, like, really high quality, then people just want to touch them. They want to interact with them. And you would go like, here, read these rules and tell me if you want to play this game, versus look at these cool pieces and tell me if you want to play this game. And people will always go towards the cool pieces. The other thing is you don't really need a game board. So if you're making games like this and you're just putting them on paper, it's like, we need a table, we're going to just sit down, but the world can be your game board. So for this game, like, we could fish off the bed, we could go off the back porch and fish. We would just turn the world, a couch becomes a boat, things like that. And then the last part is just engaging the imagination with story. So we could take the shark that's up there in the corner, and sometimes we might be great shark hunters, and our goal is to try to get that shark piece and hook it and bring it in. But we could also say those sharks really mean if you catch him, you lose the game. And so just by kind of changing one little small thing in the story, then the play experience starts to shape and change based around that. Okay, so now Jordan's getting a little older, 5 years old now. He's learning to read, write, those kind of things. So first of all, the previous game, that fishing game, it was up till midnight on Christmas Eve, actually past midnight, well into Christmas, painting these things and trying to get them all wrapped and get them under the Christmas tree on time. And so for this year, I was like, there's no way I'm going to go through that again. That was a nightmare trying to build this game. I just want to go back to that simpler times 2 years back, when we could just get a poster board and some glitter glue and just kind of play around and do that again. Then while I'm at it, I might as well teach, some alphabet, spelling again, being a good parent. You want to make sure your kids are on top of things as they grow up. And then I'll just throw in, hey, might as well talk about space travel while I'm at it, because reading, writing, and space travel are the primary things I think all 5-year-olds should know about. But it's like, teach them the bigger thing. There's planets, there's stars, there's potentially traveling between stars would be a cool thing. And here's the game we came up with. So this one he helped a lot. You can just tell by looking at the picture where he helped. So his help was down here in this quadrant, and I pretty much did the rest. So you can kind of see, he was given his little territory, and then I put the letters on. And I found these old flashcards are these, to me, they're like these terrible things. Like, they're the worst way to learn possible. And so they were just sitting there. I'm like, hey, let's put these into the game. And since they have animals on it, we'll make this game where you're in a spaceship. So I found these old spaceships, and you'll move around. And when you land on a planet with a letter, you'll get that animal. So it's kind of like you're an intergalactic zookeeper or something moving around. So the game, I thought, it worked out really well, especially for me as a player of the game, not just a designer, because this game was really interesting to play, surprisingly, where there's kind of this traveling salesman problem. There's a rule that you can't go where someone else already is, and you're trying to minimize the number of moves you make, and it's not just like a perfect grid. So it turned out to be really kind of complicated to play. Not complicated in the way that a kid couldn't play it, but if you really wanted to min-max the whole system, there was a lot of brain power you had to put into it. So I kind of liked at that level it worked at both ways. So the lessons here of this one, one, cannibalize other toys. So if you're going to make games like this, don't feel that you have to make every piece from scratch. That you're able to just grab whatever's around and throw it into your game. There's sometimes this little barrier that people get when they're trying to make these personal games, these little things, where they get stuck because they can't find a piece that they need, or they don't know how to manufacture it or whatever. And this is a way of getting around that. The other thing is building the game is an educational process. So I mentioned I'm trying to teach him these things, alphabet and planets and things. But really the act of building the game I found was more educational than the subject matter I was trying to teach through the game. So the fact that he was right in there making decisions with me, learning about like the choices we were making, helping build the board, I think he learned a lot more from that experience than he ever did from just playing the game. Okay, moving forward now, Dylan, my younger son, he's 3 years old now. So at this point in time, he wants to get involved, and he's going to be part of these games. So this gave me kind of a challenge because the difference between a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old is pretty significant in terms of their development. So trying to find a game that would fit well for both of them. And I had, thinking of this idea that I can take these toys that are laying around the house and turn them into games. So I found these robots called Z-Bots here. Some of you may have had them when you were a kid, and had a whole drawer full of them. I was like, these are perfect game pieces. There's got to be some awesome game here. So that's one of my design goals, was make a game with these robot pieces. And then I started thinking about like classic kid games from the past that no one seems to play anymore. And I started thinking of marbles. And it's like, okay, let's make a modern take on marbles. If I had a bunch of marbles and I had a bunch of robots, well, if you're a game designer, you can just write this instantly. It's like, of course, you're just going to throw marbles at robots and knock them over. It's like, what could be more fun and entertaining than that? So that was kind of my idea. I built up this kind of like simple thing, and we would just basically throw marbles at robots. So here's a picture of the board, and you would kind of draft these little robots, put them out on the board. Well, it didn't take long to realize that throwing marbles at robots is not that fun after all. It is for 10 minutes, and then when you have to reset them up or dig the marble out from underneath the couch or all this other stuff, it actually kind of gets old really quick, especially for me. So I started trying to make it a little more cerebral. Maybe in my mind I said, like, instead of making it like bowling with robots, I'm going to make it more like pool. So maybe you have to adjust your angle, and there was kind of this confined playing field. And then I also added in these different robot cards. The problem with those Z-Bots is that some of them have very small feet, and some have really big feet. And so everybody always wanted the characters with the biggest feet, of course, because they wouldn't fall over when they got hit with the marble. So to balance that out, I made these cards, and I gave them powers that were kind of inverse of their feet, basically. So it's kind of balancing the balance of the robots there. The design lesson, so I mentioned this one, setting stuff up gets boring fast. So try to get people into your game as quick as possible. If there's a lot of setup, that means there's a lot of friction. So when it's time to say, hey, let's play a game, you want to play this one that takes a lot of time to set up versus this one that we can just start playing right away. Try to get into the gameplay as fast as possible. One trick I've learned over the years is that if you make setting up part of the game, then people feel like they're playing the game, but they're actually setting it up. So for instance, in this game, I made like a robot that could raise other robots from the dead by lifting them back up again. And so then they're kind of like resetting the game, but it's a robot superpower. I kind of mentioned this before with the pieces idea, but I found it's really easy to make rules fit pieces than the other way around. So for instance, if I came up with a great robot idea, it's like, this robot can fly. And then I've got to go to a toy store and dig around and try to find a robot that looks like he can fly. Versus like in this example here, you can see a little bit of him there with the big claws. It just suggests a lot of things he could do. He's got really big claws. Maybe he can pick up marbles and move them around, or maybe he can grab other robots and throw them. And so it starts to suggest things, and then they match the rules and the icon that's supposed to represent those rules match one and one, which is a really powerful thing to do in your games. The last piece here, the last section here, give your pieces personality. The side effect of making those trading cards, I didn't intend this, I just kind of discovered it afterwards, was that it managed to give every robot had a name now. And that was a really powerful idea. So when you play the game, it's not just about here's a bunch of robots getting hit by marbles. There's this robot named Homer, and Homer's got a baseball bat, and he can hit these marbles. And so when you're out of the game context, the kids would still talk about them by name. And so they started to get a personality, and because of that, they started to get a history. And so when you play multiple games, they would remember robots by their little stories, their individual stories. And that kind of runs this thread through the kind of a narrative that runs through across games, which is really powerful if you can pick that up. If the personality is not there, then no one cares, and then when the game ends, it's over. But carrying that forward is really strong. And so this game, probably the maze game, is the one I've played the most since it's been built. And I actually started working on this one before I had kids. I made this game originally for my nephews when they were really young. And you might have heard of this game, The Amazing Labyrinth. So this is, if you haven't heard of it, it's a kid's game, and every other row or column of this maze slides. And so the maze is always kind of changing around. And I love the board, the mechanics of the board and the structure of how it makes different patterns as you slide these things. But the gameplay within the board I found to be kind of lacking. So I'm like, I could do a better job of making a game with this maze than what came in the box. So that was kind of my original inspiration. Then I was also really getting into this idea of memorable characters because of the robot game. So I was trying to think, like, this game would be all like character driven. So a thief would really feel like a thief, and a sorceress would really feel like a sorceress. And this other thing kind of came up around this point where my first pass at this game had a lot of fireballs and backstabbing and things like that were involved in the game. And my wife, Toby, she was like, why don't you ever make a game that's nonviolent? Like, why do you always have to have all these hit points and all these other, like, things hitting people and killing them and all this other stuff? I'm like, because, it's a game. And I tried it from a game designer. I'm trying to, like, educate her. It's like, see, games are about conflict and overcoming conflict. And if you take that away, there's nothing really there. And trying to explain this to her academically. Of course, she was, if you were a good game designer, you could do it. Okay, I guess I gotta have to do this. So I kind of wanted to rework the rules so that there wouldn't be hit points, that you weren't really like fighting. You were racing to get treasures, but I tried to take all the fighting out. And this is a thread you'll see through the rest of the talk, keeps coming up again, just to get her to play my games. Here's a kind of a very early prototype out of cardboard box. Did this mostly like in an afternoon, just chopped up an old box. Didn't work very well at all because the pieces keep snagging with each other, and it's really just the UI of moving the maze around is terrible. But it got it kind of started. Here was the version that I made for my nephews, and this was another one of those things where it was a Christmas present. So I was down in my dad's workshop just with painting, and he has a great woodworking shop. So just cutting these pieces and getting them all painted, and literally like blow drying this stuff dry so I could put it in a box a couple hours before the kids would wake up on Christmas morning. Just pulled an all-nighter getting this thing done. So I'm like, this is great for, now for my kids. I'll just call up my sister and I'll just say, hey, can you just mail me that game? This will be no stress Christmas gift for my kids. I'll just put it in a box and give it to them. And she's like, oh, I sold that in a garage sale. And I'm like, oh, okay. So yeah, that's my reaction too. It's like, what? How could you do that? So I had to redo it all over again from scratch, and it turned out to be a much bigger project, of course, than I originally thought. But I'm kind of glad, because here's the final version. So it's all like hand-painted ceramic tiles and wood-framed and cards and the spell books and everything that I made for it. So I just kind of, now that I'd gone through 2 versions of it, I was able to kind of like take it to this other level where I knew how the gameplay worked out by that point, so it made it a lot easier. Here's a close-up of it. So the game, like I said, it's non-violent. You pick a character, you run them around the maze, you're trying to collect those treasures there, and then avoid dragons and monsters and things inside of it while sliding this maze around and changing it. So one thing I've learned from this game, I still play this game all the time. I take it into work, and the people at work play it around the office at lunches, and people will come over and we'll play it. And I still make changes to it, so I'll still like tweak around. The main thing that we do is we'll kind of like add new characters or kind of goof with the rules. And so it brings up this point, and I think it's a really important point. If you're making games like this, like, you don't need to finish them. Like, you're making a game, you're not making it for money, you're making it because it's supposed to be a cool game for your friends or family. And at work, most of us are constantly under this deadline pressure. It's like, it's got to ship, it's got to ship, it's got to ship. And it just kind of drives you crazy after a while, wears you down. Where with this kind of stuff, if you don't need to ship, you can just keep making the game better. And it's like, shouldn't all games kind of be that way? The character part that I mentioned are great for expansion. So when we do play this with other people and they suggest new rules, I say like, well, don't put that rule into the game. Instead, put that rule onto a character and then bring that character into the game, and we'll see how it plays. So it lets you kind of insert or remove rules. And because of that, every time you play the game, it's a little bit different, and people can pick the characters they like. So for instance, this character here, that you can't see, the witch over there in the bottom, she had an ability which was she could make people go fast. Like, if you don't make your move in 30 seconds, you lose your turn. And I made her on purpose because when I play with some of my friends, they take forever to make their moves. And I'm like, I'm just going to make this character then, and if I play against you, I don't like to be bored waiting for you to take your turn. I'll just play with this witch. So it lets you kind of put rules in and out of your game, and then it gets tailored to the audience that's playing it. So after that, another year goes by. And I should mention that even though I'm saying like a lot of these games were Christmas gifts that I made, they were almost never done by Christmas. The idea for me was just to get all the pieces into a box, give them to Christmas, give them to the kids at Christmas, have them open them up. And then that was kind of my deadline pressure. but then we just kept playing with them and changing them after that. And so in some cases, the first play test was on Christmas when the kids would open it up, and you immediately realize it's like, yeah, we have to change this around. So this game here, the maze game had like all these pieces and just, production nightmare again. And I keep doing it every other year. It's kind of like, oh, I need to do like a heavy production. And then it's like, that sucked. Why did I ever think that? Let me do something light. And so this year is like only dice, wooden cubes. I'm just going to stick stickers on them, really simple. I love this idea of this kind of like bringing the characters into maze. So I wanted to expand that and say, well, what if the characters were modules? That instead of saying this is a thief who has this ability, it's like there's a bunch of different abilities and you put them all together to make your own robot in this case. The other thing was with the kids at this age, Jordan, 8 years old, he was old enough now he wanted to think and plan. And Dylan at 5 years old, he was like, I don't want anything to do with that. If I have to wait, then I'm going to get bored and I'm going to leave. So I wanted to make a game that was like super fast. It was almost always your turn every single time. Turns went so fast, you're just rolling dice like crazy. And of course, then the nonviolent option, which I'll talk about in a second. So here's the game when it's all set up. Everybody has these little robots to start with tiny legs and a tiny little eye. And then there's this junkyard in the middle of the field. And there's robot parts that are all face down. So you pick up dice and you look at the part and then you add it onto your robot. And then when you're making moves, you pick up your robot and you roll him. And that determines like what you can do. So this is kind of the module character design I was talking about, where I didn't realize this. I just made a bunch of these dice with different things, and when we started putting them together, I realized like you can get some really like personality characters out of these different parts. So you can make them happy or sad by how you adjusted their eyebrows, or you turn their mouth upside down or right side up if they're frowning or smiling, and you're able to like kind of like fiddle with these characters. It doesn't really matter at all as far as the game rules go. What your robot looks like is irrelevant to the actual mechanics of the game. But I would found like I tried to make this game play really fast, and it would be someone's turn, and they would be playing with their robot off to the side. Like, that's kind of cool. Like in some ways it's not your turn. There's something for you to do. So this idea, like kind of fiddling with the pieces and keeping people active has become really important to me. It's like nobody should really ever have this downtime, and you can see it sometimes if like people just get up and leave to go get some food, or they're playing an iPhone game on their on their smartphone while they're playing a board game. It's like something's wrong with your board game if that's the case. So try to get them engaged into it. So even if they're not technically playing the game, there's still something for them to play with. The other thing with the 2 victory conditions I mentioned, so this is a game about robots throwing bombs at each other and blowing them up. And then my wife's like, hey, what's the nonviolent thing with robots with bombs? I'm like, I can't think of what robots with bombs would be nonviolent. So what I added in was a second thing where there's an optional victory condition where the robot can teleport up to the spaceship and get off the planet, and there's kind of this moral victory, if robots have morals, that you can go towards. So what that gave me, it was really interesting that I found out. So now Toby could play the game with us, and she could try for that moral victory of like, I'm not going to fight, I'm just going to try to like leave the battlefield altogether, while the kids were throwing bombs at each other. And there's this kind of 2 stories going on, but there's also this kind of interesting thing. It's like you're almost proving, like if she wins, it's like, see, I proved that violence doesn't solve problems. If the kids win, they're like, see, violence solves problems. So you can kind of play with that. As me as a designer, it's my job is to make sure both options are valid and you can achieve both options. I don't want to really weight one or the other. But having the 2 victory conditions intertwined like that, I found was like a really powerful way of like getting more people involved, but also adding a lot of richness and texture to the game, so that when you play it multiple times, you can try different strategies and see how they compare to each other. This one here, Zilla, you can't quite see the title up there, but the Zilla is the name of the statue that I saw in a comic book store. And I went in a comic book store, saw him up on the shelf, and I'm like, oh, that's an awesome game piece. I have to get Zilla and make a game out of him. I have no idea what that game is, but give him to me right now. I'll make a game out of him. And so the guy's like, yeah, he's $100. Like, okay, hang on. Let me figure out what the game is first, and then I'll come back and buy him. Like, this is one of those cases where I really didn't want to jump into it too much. But then I just got obsessed by it. Like every waking moment, I was like, okay, what's the game for Zilla? Because I knew I wanted to buy him. I just had to come up with that justification that he'd be worth $100 to do. So started like working on it. It's like, okay, my design goal, I need to make a game that will use Zilla. And might as well put some lasers in it because lasers are awesome. And I've been wanting to make a game with lasers for a while. And Zilla plus lasers, okay, that's got to be great. 2 awesome things. And then just for my own benefit, asymmetric rules and goals. Like, let's hear it for that. Not too great at citing as back of the box. But for a game designer, it's actually a cool puzzle to say, like, I'm going to make a game where it's not like there's two victory conditions, because there was two victory conditions in this game, but two completely different rule sets. The rule set for Kongzilla is completely different from the rule set with the army men who have the lasers. And it's almost like you're playing two different games, and they just happen to overlap in the middle. So as a design challenge for myself, I was really excited about that. Here's a kind of a final setup. There's no board. You just play it on the floor. And I removed so I removed the turrets from the guns and mounted laser pointers. So like a laser pointer up here, and I stuck mirrors on these things. And so you're trying to bounce the lasers off of, So you're trying to bounce the lasers off the mirror and then hit them into Kongzilla. And if you can hit him, then you kill him. But then meanwhile, he's trying to destroy these buildings back here, which I just got from a model railroad store. They're not glued together. They're just kind of propped up and held by gravity. So, my design lesson on this one is, like, bigger's better, of course. The mighty Kongzilla, he's awesome. Everybody who sees this game is like, I got to play this game. And hopefully when you saw the pieces, you'd be like, I want to play that game. But it's so big that it takes up a room, and it makes it really hard to dig the thing out and set it up and then play it and then put it all back away again. So it kind of goes back to that thing about, like, this friction of, like, hey, what do you want to do? It's like, let's play Kongzilla. Oh, well, there's a lot of work involved in playing that game. So if you get to a certain point, I found that you actually kind of defeat the purpose of getting people to play your game. Important lesson to keep in mind. The other one is, who needs numbers? This is something I still, even on the SimCity game I'm working on now, it's like, let's try to get rid of all numbers. Let's see if we can do that. Because can you express these ideas in other ways? The first inclination for a lot of game designers would be, we need hit points, and we need armor class, and we need die rolls, and charts and tables, and range calculations, and all of these things. And so just trying to get all of that stuff out of the game so there's no numbers, I found is for me, it's a really important way to structure a game setup. Can't see this one at all. It's called Monster Hunter, is the game here. It was actually created before the other Monster Hunter video game that's much more famous than my game. At this time, I had been playing Diablo a lot, and the kids couldn't play it, of course. Well, I wanted them to play it, but my wife was like, they can't play Diablo at age 10 and 7. What are you talking about? And I'm like, come on, it's not that bad. It's only, oh, yeah, it's pretty bad. So, okay, instead what I'll do is I'll just make a card game of Diablo, and then the kids can have all the fun of Diablo, well, all the loot and killing monsters and leveling up without all the blood and gore and other things going on in that game. So that was kind of my main goal. And the other thing was, at that time, the Wizards of the Coast, who was making Dungeons & Dragons, they came out with the 3rd edition rulebook. And I was really excited when they announced that they were updating the rules. And I don't know how many of you play Dungeons & Dragons, but like when I was younger, I played a lot. And I couldn't wait to get my kids to play Dungeons & Dragons. And I got these rule books. I was like, wow, this is really like complicated. And these rule books are really big. And like, this is a pain to teach. So I wanted to try to capture all of that appeal of role-playing and storytelling without the whole kind of like looking through 3 volumes worth of charts and tables and character sheets and all of that. So my first version of the game, just on index cards, just cut in half in pencil, and I pretty much got the first version working in one afternoon. The structure and just a few play tests and iterations, I got it all figured out, and then spent who knows how long, like months and months, just kind of converting the artwork over and trying to get the card template. I didn't do the art on the cards. I set up all the framing, but I didn't do the art. That's mostly from the Monster Manual book. It just scanned out of the book because I bought the book, so I figured I might as well use them in some ways. And kind of, it's a basic, if you know the loop of a Diablo-style game, then that's what this game is. Out in the middle here, there's some lands that you can go to, and then this is your town, and you have a different character, so like a wizard or a fighter, and you're picking up loot, and you kill monsters to get money, to buy loot, to get your character stronger so you can kill bigger monsters to get more loot, and so on until you kill a dragon here in the middle. So it's that basic kind of treadmill where you're just kind of advancing up and up and up through the game. But the nice thing about it, again, it was nonviolent in the sense that the characters can't fight each other directly. So you're all trying to fight monsters. So you could team up with people and say, hey, let's go get that monster together, and we'll split the gold. Or you could go out alone, or you could be a thief and kind of like steal people's gold and pickpocket. So there's a lot of variety that made a lot of story come out of the game as you played it. So lessons in this one, first of all, use Excel. Even though you're making these small little board games, well, they're not getting so small anymore. You know, they started out kind of simple, but now as the kids are getting older and I'm getting kind of more advanced in the things I want to try, they're starting to get beyond my ability to keep it all in my head at once. So normally, you know, this is the kind of thing you don't really want to show people about how awesome your game is. Maybe game designers could appreciate it, but it's to get all of those cards balanced and how much. There's a monster that has this much strength and this much speed, and you kill it, and it's going to give you this much gold. Or, you know, are they all balanced, and how do we keep track? There's hundreds of cards in this game, so kind of putting it all in Excel was really important. The other thing I find, most of you guys are already in the industry, but a lot of people come to me and say, you know, hey Stone, how do you get into the game industry? I'm a student, you know, my son or daughter really wants to get in the game industry. What can they do to do it? This was actually my game that got me into the game design industry. Up to this point, I was a computer programmer at a graphics company, and I made this card game, and my original intention was like, hey, this is based on Diablo. Wouldn't it be cool if I could go to Blizzard and get their permission to brand it as a Diablo card game? So very naive. I didn't know really what was going on. So I just like walked into Blizzard North, which was over in San Mateo here, and said, hey, I have this card game. You want to play it? And they're a bunch of gamers there. So they're like, yeah, we'll play this game. And they started playing it. And it turned out I was playing with the CEO, Dave Brevik. I didn't know it at the time. And we were all playing for a few rounds. And the game takes about 3 or so hours to play, so we only got to play about an hour of it. And I was going to make my pitch about, see, great game, let's brand it. And they're like, hey, you want to work here? I'm like, sure, that sounds better than being a graphics programmer. So I got the job there. And it's only after the fact where you realize it's like, wait, you could just walk into Blizzard and get a job. Like, that's not the advice I really want to give to a lot of my students. But, you know, it worked in this case. And one of the reasons it worked is because I showed them that spreadsheet. I had printed out a lot of the spreadsheet documentation. And so when we were talking about the game and I could show them all of the work that I'd put kind of behind the scenes, and they're like, that looks just like the spreadsheets we use in Diablo. So they could see that I was able to, you know, kind of work with that as well. There was also kind of a joke for a while, which was the only reason they hired me was because they wanted to finish playing that game, and there's only one of these games in existence. So if they wanted to play it, they would have to hire me, which is another reason not to mass produce your games, I guess. Keeps you in demand. So now I'm working with a bunch of game designers every day, and some of the best game designers out there at Blizzard, and you know, I'm bringing in games like Maze and Monster Hunter, and we're playing these games, and you know, it's like, hey, Christmas is coming up. I have to make a game for my kids. You guys want to help? Which is like this great like new influx where before it would just be me kind of sitting alone in my room kind of tinkering with ideas. Now I've got like this whole team of really creative people all throwing in their ideas. So my goal this year for 2003 was there's a game called Masters of Orion, which some of you may have played. And my son, he was really into that game a lot, and there was supposed to be, I think Masters of Orion 3 or 4, whatever it was coming out around that time. And that's what his number one thing on his Christmas list that year was, I would like Masters of Orion software. I'm like, oh, my son, you know, he's like, he's awesome. A video game is his number one thing. And so the game got delayed, like a lot of games do, right before Christmas. And so I'm like, well, I'll just make him a board game version of it, because I made a Diablo board game, so I could probably make a Masters of Orion board game. Again, going back to this idea of no numbers, if you played Masters of Orion, you know that a lot of people call it, you're playing a spreadsheet. The idea is that like you're just looking at these big columns and tables of numbers. So I'm like, well, can I make Masters of Orion with no numbers? Because you know, my first inclination was just to go to their website and look at all the stats of all the different ships and technologies and just kind of copy them in. And I realized that would never work for a board game. You know, it's great for a computer, but no one wants to do that around a dining room table. Then the last part, that the pieces had to fit in a small box, it's kind of an interesting design goal for myself, but my games had been getting bigger and bigger, and they don't fit in small boxes. In fact, taking them even to a party is a bit of a challenge sometimes, because there's so many pieces in the boxes and containers and everything are so big, they're just not very portable. So for this one, one of my coworkers, Michael Dashow, he had found a little plastic pencil box, and he's like, hey, I thought you might want to make, you know, use this for game storage. And that became my kind of like, whatever I make has to fit in this box. So it's cut off, unfortunately. There's a picture of the box, but it's about a third the size of the board. The board doesn't fit in the box, unfortunately, but all the pieces do. And so when you open up the box and pull out all the junk, there's all these spaceship parts and tokens and things like that that all come out of it. So if you've played a game like Masters of Orion, it starts out where everybody's here kind of on the corners, and then the board is empty, and there's a stack of tiles that you start flipping over. So for instance, the first player goes here, and you're flipping over these tiles, and think of it like a roller coaster ride. You can't get off the track once you're on until you land at a planet. And so you just start like working your way through, filling out the galaxy, making these different patterns. This guy landed in a little warp that warped him over to here. It's a bit of a king of the hill thing. You're trying to get to the middle and hold the middle for a while. So after you play, then the board starts to flesh itself out. Different planets have different technologies on them, and you start to build up your empire as you go. Here's a close-up of one of the ships. This is how I got rid of the numbers, or one of the way I got rid of the numbers, was that all the tiles are two-sided. So when you take damage, you just flip the tile over to the other side, and then when you repair it, you flip it back again. So there's no real, like, you don't have to keep track of, like, how many hits this has taken or how much armor or hull damage or anything like that. It's just you flip it, and it's really immediate and obvious, and also kind of visceral. When you just look at it, you feel like, ouch, that hurts when you look at your ship, so you can get a little bit of that emotion into it as well. So I mentioned before, cannibalize other pieces, other toys. Here I'm just actually cannibalizing other games. When I first tried to build this board, it was really hard to get perfect squares, and cutting them myself was really hard to make them perfect. So in this case, I just took a game called Carcassonne. You might be familiar with it. And I was like, that's $25. That's worth it. They've cut the squares perfectly for me, and I'll just stick stickers on top of it. So that was totally worth $25 of headache with really nice thick pieces too. All the little spaceships are just pulled from another game. So just take what you can, and don't worry about the that you have to do all the precision work yourself. The other thing I realized is that there's a lot of game designers have this tendency, which is kind of mean in some ways, but maybe it's kind of expressing their power over the player, which is like, I'm going to punish you a lot. If you don't do what I think you should do, you're going to get punished, and that's how I'm going to prevent you from doing things I don't think you should do. And this game in the first iterations was kind of like that. You'd hit some asteroids, and you would get like set back really far. But the game takes about an hour to play, and if you hit asteroids on the first turn, then you're like, well, I should just quit now because I'll never catch up. So over the course of the game, we kept minimizing all of the punishment parts and enhancing the rewards, and the game just kept getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And every time something would really hurt people, it's like, oh, it takes forever to rebuild your ship. I was like, oh, go back home and you can repair in one turn. Or get this robot here, and this robot automatically fixes your ship for you. So we started adding little mechanics into the game to keep it like going forward always. Around this time, so the kids 12 and 9, I'm driving them to school every day. And like a lot of kids who sit in the back seat of a car, they fight with each other wherever they're going, especially if they're 12 and 9 years old. So the kids are like fighting. I'm driving them to school. It's like, I need to make them a game that will make a game for them that will keep them occupied on their way to school. And the design goal here has to be car friendly. If any of you, when you were growing up, maybe some of you, I'm curious, raise your hands if you played games like this in your car. So, okay, about a third of you are familiar with this. So it's, your parents throw these in the back of the car, and they have great properties, which is that all the rules are kind of self-contained on the card. They don't need batteries, which is great. And they keep their state. So if you stop to go to a gas station or a restroom or get some food, and you just throw these down, even if they fall on the floor, those little red things that slide, they don't unslide. They're kind of sticky. They'll stay in their position. So I got a couple of those. I tore them all apart. I figured out how it was made, and then kind of came up with my own version of that, where you're each a wizard, and there's this little dial that you can spin here, and this mark right here shows you what spell you're picking in the wheel. And then you have life and you have power. And there's two goals, like a lot of my games, where it's like you can either kill the person by taking their life down to 0, or you can get your own power up to 5, and then you win the moral victory of, I didn't have to fight you, I won another way. And that kind of gives you a lot of different texture in the gameplay. So the game is really kind of a rock, paper, scissors type thing. To begin with, there's little monsters that will pop up out of the top that got cut off that slide. It started out as a really simple, well, maybe more complex rock, paper, scissors game. There was 8 different things to choose from, but it felt really much like it was way too random, just like rock, paper, scissors is. I know a lot of game designers who swear by rock, paper, scissors. It's like, oh, you're a game designer, just make a rock, paper, scissors, that'll solve your problem. And what I hate about rock, paper, scissors is that perfect equal balance between everything, to me, is the same thing as saying just choose randomly, which is what you do in rock, paper, scissors. Like, you don't need to make a decision if every decision is equal to anything else that you could do. So in this game, it started out very kind of flat when we played it, and then we started putting different things into the game that would weight things more heavily towards the others. For instance, you can only go around the circle or into the middle. You can't just pick anything on the dial. During the game design class that I teach, I spend a whole lecture talking about this game, so there's way more to it than I can get into in this talk. But the kind of breaking the rock, paper, scissors model is really kind of the core of the design of this game. The other thing is the kids. So the game itself, I did pretty much in an afternoon with one of my friends at Blizzard. We just kind of set it up in his office, and we came up with this basic structure. And then it took me about 6 months to make those cards with all of the intricacies of the paper engineering that needs to be done and the sliding things and all of that. Then I gave it to my kids. Hey, look at this game I made for you. They played it maybe about a week in the car, and then they memorized the cards, so they didn't need them anymore. They could actually play the game in their head without the need of the card. And I was like, oh, that's kind of cool, but it's also really sad. Like, I spent more time making the card than you guys actually needed to use it. And I needed a little more variety to the game. Originally, both sides were exactly the same. So we started adding in these little extra rules along the way, just like all these games, that over time you can start to adjust them and modify them. But towards the end, they had soccer variants of this and karate variants of it, and they were just like going off these completely different, use the same mechanics. Around this time, I had left Blizzard and I went over to EA to start working on Spore. The kids, 13 and 10 now, they're starting to kind of, the whole family basically was too busy to just sit around and play games. We used to have like these dedicated times where let's sit around and play games, and it was really great. It was really a lot of fun. But now there's soccer practice, piano practice. I have to work late. My wife has a meeting. So we weren't able to really like get all of this stuff accomplished and set up correctly. So I'm like, what if I make a game that can be played whenever you want to? And we have this refrigerator that just has a bunch of junk on it. So I'm going to clean off the refrigerator, and you'll see the top part that you can't see actually. The top part holds all the pieces, and the bottom part has the game board. And then I also didn't want to make this realistic thing with all this artwork and stuff. So it's be very abstract. I'm not going to try to decorate it and pretend it's something that it's not. It's just a bunch of pieces. So here's kind of a time lapse. The game itself takes about, the current version that we're on, now that the kids are kind of gone off to college, that we've been playing for over a year. But when they were both home a lot, we could probably get through a game in a month or two. So the idea is that the game's always up there. It's always available to play. When it's your turn, you take your move, but don't stress about it. Just take your move when you feel like it. So here's kind of a very fast version of what's happening. So you start out at these bases, and you're going to try to touch all the colored dots, and then try to touch the other people's bases as well using these colored popsicle sticks and magnets. So it starts out pretty simple and clean, but over the course of the months, your refrigerator starts to turn into this crazy spaghetti abstract art piece, which confuses a lot of people that come over for dinner and see this on the refrigerator. But you kind of see it growing, and I really like this it wasn't a grid, it wasn't confined to this, you had to play in a certain way, that it was really kind of open-ended, and you made these really cool organic patterns. Again, kind of going against conventional wisdom that I've been spouting off a lot of the other talk, is like, hey, let's make games fast, you got to be active, you got to keep going. It's like, well, what if I do the opposite? What if turns take forever? Like, our turns now are taking several months because I have to wait for the kids to come back from college on Thanksgiving to take their next move. So we're kind of like, this is a really long game, but it still holds up, it still works, as long as you don't want to use your refrigerator surface for anything else. And then this is kind of what I was saying about challenge conventional design wisdom. You're able to kind of mess up, you're making these games for yourself, you're not trying to sell them. So it's okay to experiment. In fact, I'd strongly encourage that you do experiment as you work your way through these. All right, so started a little late, so I'm starting to run out of time, so I'm going to start zipping through some of these. I've already been going pretty fast, but it's going to get a little faster now. At this point, when I was at Maxis, I was the lead designer of the Cell game for Spore. So if you played Spore, that very first game, when you have the little cellular creatures moving around. So of course I wanted to make a board game version of it. So that was my main design goal. Also, I want to try to make a 3-player game. This is another thing as a game designer. It's really hard to design 3-player games. And so for myself, it's like, this will be, I want to play with that design space and see, why is it hard to design 3-player games? And in fact, you can't play it with 2 or 4. You can only play it with 3. Then this idea of fast combat. There'll be no randomness, but I still want everything to be really fast. Here's kind of the final creatures. They don't look like Spore creatures. They're more futuristic. It's called Nanobots. The reason why was because I wanted lasers in the game, and I never could convince them at Maxis to put lasers in the Cell game, but I always wanted them there. So it's like, well, if it's my own board game, I might as well make these robot nanobots of the future, and then I could put lasers in. Here's a close-up. These pieces took forever to make, of course. They're like made out of wood, and the metal clips, I had to like grind these metal clips down to get them to all fit into each other. But the results are really nice. It's a really solid, like tactile game, heavy. It's really fun to they feel like you're assembling these robots as you kind of put them together. So yeah, I wanted to be fast-paced. This is the main failing of this game, was that because there was no randomness in it, it was slow because people have to think. And if you can predict everything out several turns in advance, then it just makes your game drag on and on and on. The other design lesson I learned, I'd mentioned that you use your board game as a way to get into a video game company. Well, I was already in a video game company, so my next design lesson was you use your board game as a pitch for your video game. So this was originally Spore, which then I made a cell game, which I made into a board game. And then we had an opportunity to make an Xbox Live Arcade game. So I was like, hey, I have an idea. Spore cell game with lasers. And I was able to pitch that game and use my prototype game as a mock-up of what the gameplay might be like. And we came up with this game, Microbot, which is still on Xbox Live Arcade as a download, where it's basically cell game with lasers. So it's kind of, I think this might be, I don't know, but Microbot might be the first computer game that was based on a board game that was based on a computer game. So I'm not sure if that's true, but it's kind of gone through back and forth iterations. So the kids are getting older now. They love their video games. I trained them well, almost too well, because they don't really want to play board games with me anymore. Given a choice between Tony Hawk or Halo or these other games or playing a board game, they were like, well, I'd rather play a video game. They're much better. I'm like, oh, this is terrible. What have I done? So this year I'm going to get them. I'm going to make a game that's going to compete. So how do I do that? Well, if I were to get 100 zombies and fill them into a shoebox, and then on Christmas they open up this box and it's just filled with zombies, that's going to get their attention. And then if I throw in some robots and the robots fight those zombies, then it's like, okay, they're going to play this game. And it worked. So they opened up the lid on Christmas. They're like, what is this? How do you play? Let's set it up. And it's like, I got this video game over there, but no, let's play this board game instead. So kind of pushing all of the levers and buttons that I possibly can. And because of the nanobots, the slowness, which I think, we didn't play that game very much because it was too much thought, it was too slow. So this one's like, it's about robots killing zombies. I do not want you to think. I just want you to kill zombies as fast as possible. So it kind of started out as a tower defense. The kids were playing a lot of Portal, myself included, around that time. And so it was based in Aperture Labs was the backstory. And Aperture Labs is like working on robots to kill zombies for some reason. Some close-ups of it. This was the final board after the prototype one where I had it laser cut. Now it's really easy just to send PDF files off to companies and they'll send you back in the mail laser cut versions of them on acrylic. And so it had this really cool vibe to it. Again, one of those games you set it up and people don't need to know the rules. They just want to play it just by looking at it, which is a huge win for a designer. All right, so one of the things that I did in this game to make it play fast was that I realized it's okay if everybody's thinking at the same time, that's fine. It's when one person is thinking and somebody's not thinking is when the game starts to bog down. So everybody makes their moves. They do all the planning at exactly the same time. If you played Robo Rally, it's kind of got a feeling like that. You're programming these robots and they're moving around through this maze, killing guys. And then we added this little rule in that when 3 of the 4 players were done, they could count down on the last person. So they'd be 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And if they did make their move, they just didn't get a move. And so it's kind of like this thing where you have a little bit of pressure, but then you have a lot right towards the end when everybody's going to get upset with you. The other thing that I realized is what is a player's role in this world? So in the very first version of the game, there was a lot of confusion from players because they would put up these programming cards and their robot would run into a wall and then he would shoot a missile straight into a wall. And there was a lot of confusion. Players like, why would a robot do that? And all I did was I made one very small change, not even to the rules, just to the story that I would tell before the game would start. And so instead of saying you are a robot, I say you are a robot programmer, and you're up in the, looking down through a glass window, looking down at the field. And that one small change, suddenly everything worked. It's like if the robot crashes into a wall, well, you're a bad robot programmer. And it's very, very small, but it really pointed out, who am I in this world? Why am I even there? It makes a really big difference to how players play your game. Soccer bots, I was really getting into kind of this plastic cutting now, this new thing. It's like, hey, I can start making these pieces of my own. I don't need to steal kids' toys anymore. Nanobots was too slow. I'm going to remake it as fast as possible. I'm going to make it so that it plays as fast as possible because I love that idea of building these little robots and having them battle. the laser cut pieces I mentioned. And then wouldn't really be a battle game, it'd be a sports game. Dylan was playing a lot of soccer. My wife was coaching soccer. So I'm like, let's make a soccer-style game that would play and have the fast action of a soccer game. This is just a template that I sent off to get the pieces cut from. Here's the final board. You build these little robots, kind of move them around. And everything about this game was designed to be fast. It was like, you build your robots really quickly. There's only 3. You either move, you shoot, or you grab, like dribble, to move the ball around. The red thing there is like the ball that he's grabbing and pulling down the field. There was no numbers. Everything was just like, just play, play, play. And of course, it took forever because there was no randomness to the game. And I'm just like, what can I do? How can I make this game finally work? So I just gave up and I just bought a chess timer and just stuck the chess timer down. It's like, you have 30 seconds. That's it. So a complete cop-out on my part. But I finally just gave up on that design goal of making the non-random fast game. I actually kind of believe it can't be done now, or at least I've given up trying. But the chess clock worked really well. The other thing about the chess clock was that it matched the theme. So the theme of the game was a sports game, and having a clock and a timer in a sports game works really well. So it doesn't feel out of place. In fact, it makes that illusion of sports feel even more accurate. So I mentioned, the lesson I learned here was like, I can start making my own pieces now. This is pretty cool. This is pretty powerful. I don't need to find them somewhere else. And then the part I just talked about is like, if you really want to control the length of the game, just stick a timer on your game. The swords game, Monster Hunter, another one of our family's favorite games. We never could play it anymore. It takes 3 hours. Almost impossible to find time for all of us to sit down and play this game. So I'm like, hey, just made a speed version of Nanobots. Let me make a speed version of Monster Hunter. Some of you may be familiar with Ben Boos. He's the artist for Diablo. He had just made this book called Swords. This is awesome. He did all the interface artwork in Diablo and the weapon design and stuff. It's just crazy detailed stuff. So he had just made a book, and I was working with him. It's like, I need to make a game with swords in it, so this will be this game. So a lot like Monster Hunter in concept, where instead of a character, you have a whole army of little meeples, these wooden guys, and you get these swords that give them power. You go out into the battlefield, and you fight these monsters. Different swords give your characters different powers, and so you can kind of tune your army's strengths based on the swords that you get. The kind of lesson that I learned from this one is like, I wanted to make a fast RPG style game, and you start looking in your own domain. If I'm looking at Dungeons and Dragons, or I'm looking at other type of role-playing games, even Diablo, which is pretty fast-paced, but I'm all like really constrained by my design space in that case. And instead what I did was I looked at Vegas and looked at the craps tables. It's like, wow, that's a fast action, high adrenaline, exciting game. Let me pull that into and use that concept. So instead of rolling dice, you're rolling these little meeple characters. The other thing that I really liked about this game was I did this in-game balancing, dynamic in-game balancing. And what this one does for me is that I didn't have to do that Excel spreadsheet that I did for Monster Hunter. I was able to make any kind of crazy monster I wanted, throw it on the table, and then every turn the bounty on it goes up over the course of the game. So a big monster might have a lot of coins on it, while a small monster has a very few coins on it. And so you're kind of able to, the players are able to self-balance and self-tune the game as they play it. And I can just make crazy monsters one after another and just throw them in the game, and it just works. So that was kind of a nice lesson to realize maybe you don't need Excel if you let the players able to control things like that in the game. All right, 2 more to go. We're almost to the end here. I know we're running just a little bit over, but it should be a couple minutes. This game, the one for the previous Christmas, goal, make a party game. I was getting the kids. Now, Jordan has already moved out. He was in college already. It was the kind of games that we like to play had changed a lot. It was harder to get people together to play these epic space games and monster games and things. So I'm like, I'm going to make a game that's just a party game. None of the standard tropes of a lot of the games that we play every day. Just take those all out. And then my wife she broke her ankle around that time playing soccer. So she had an iPad, and she completely got addicted to Words with Friends. And that was all she was doing, was playing Words with Friends. So I'm like, okay, my design goal is to make a game that's better than Words with Friends, which I failed to do. So I'll jump to the chase there. That's a really hard one to pull off. So the idea was get a laser cutter, cut 1,001 word tiles, just a bunch of random words that I put together. I actually kind of pulled them from the Scribblenauts game. I found like a dump of like all the words in Scribblenauts and was just able to like, hey, good, they did the work for me of finding cool, interesting nouns. Put 1,001 of those together, and I had no idea what the game would be. It's just like I made these tiles, and I was rushing to get them all made for Christmas, and I had no idea what the game was. But I figured like, if I give you a box of 1,001 word tiles and you can't make a game out of it, then you should not be a game designer, because that should be pretty easy to do. And so here's the final game. It's kind of like a Scrabble type thing, where you have a book and you write down a secret word, and then you put two tiles together and try to get people to guess the word. So in this example here, somebody put down like garbage target. In their book, they might have written trash can. And so people are trying to guess the word trash can, where garbage, monster, any guesses? Yeah, Oscar the Grouch. Not Cookie Monster. He doesn't eat garbage. But yeah, Oscar the Grouch. So that's the kind of game where, and it's a really interesting game, like depending on who you know, like would they get this or not? And so it's different. Who you're targeting actually changes the way that you think about it. So number one lesson, find a friend with a laser cutter. Kate Compton, who I worked with at the time, she had a subscription to the tech shop, which is, they just have laser cutters and all sorts of great stuff there. So she helped me out a lot, and that's really all you need to make great games is that friend. The other thing is let players play themselves. So I had talked a bit about who are you in this world? Are you a spaceship pilot? Are you a general, of an army? And it's like, well, what if you're just yourself? And that's kind of what this game brought out. It's like and in a way that really gets you deep into yourself and makes you really think about other people internally to try to get these matches with these words. Okay, so the last game here, this is one, I don't have a lot to say about it because this is one I just made for Christmas. Working on SimCity. Obviously, I want to make a SimCity the board game. Made some shops and factories and little stores out of wood. And the idea here was like, I don't want to be like a city management game. I want it to be a people, like it's about the people, not about the buildings. And this is something with SimCity that we're working on right now, where we're really like, it's not about the buildings, it's about the people. How do we get people to care, players to care? So here's kind of the final game. You're kind of like building up a little bit of Carcassonne kind of thing going on where you're putting down these tiles, you're building up these cities. But what you notice is, well, the original version had little meeples, the little wooden guys, and you're moving them around to find jobs. And they go to work, they get a job, they bring home money, then they can go shopping to get happiness, and there's this whole little flow. And it turned out the game was like really boring. Not that the mechanics were bad, it's that the fiction of getting up and going to work to get money so that you can spend it to be happy, and then do that again tomorrow. It's like, that's what I do every day. It's like, I don't want to sit down and play a game about that. Like, how depressing. So instead what I did was I took out the meeples and I replaced them with cars. And it just changed the whole vibe of the game around. It's like, now it's a game about racing to work as fast as possible. And so it got renamed Race City instead of Sim City. But then we added ramps and oil slicks and all sorts of fun things. So it kind of just changed up the whole game. So it's not really about Sim City now at all. It's just about this crazy town where everybody takes high-performance cars to work every morning, and the first come, first serve. One lesson, like I said, I'm still working on this one, so it's still has some iterations to go, but this idea of follow the fun, like don't become a slave to this idea that you might have started out with, and I've touched on this throughout the whole talk, but it's okay to modify your idea. There's no one holding you to certain things, and so if something doesn't work, just change it. Like you'll have only yourself to like hold responsible for these things, and just do what it takes. All right, so just to wrap up here real quick, what's next? So I've lost my captive audience. The kids, if you can remember way back to when I started this talk, the kids look like this. They look much more like this. They're both off at college now, so I don't, when they were young, you say, hey, play this game now because this is what we're doing, and you can get away with that. And now they're not even there anymore. So it's like, what game should I make next year? It's like, I don't know. They're not there anymore to play with. This idea that technology keeps advancing, you've kind of seen this through the course of the talk. It's like in the beginning, I'm just cannibalizing all these pieces, and towards the end, there's like laser cutting and all of this like technology that they have out there now to make your own pieces. It's just there's going to be some really great games that anybody can make now with this technology. Really creative stuff. I'm really looking forward to that. And then this idea about video games or first board games keeps coming up in my mind. It's like you'll notice this trend here where it's like I'm trying to take the immediacy and the action of video games and put them into a board game context. And that can be really challenging and hard to do, but it's like, it's got to be faster, it's got to be more immediate, it's got to be in your face, there's got to be like all this stuff. And it's like, where does that live? It's got to live in your head, because I can't do animation and sound effects and all this other stuff. So to try to bridge that gap between video games and board games, I'm still like puzzling over what that means. And in some cases, I'm like, well, why don't I just make video games for my kids instead? I'm like, but I do that as a job, so that wouldn't be fun to do my job at home as well. So anyway, so real quick conclusion, there's only really one thing I want you to take away from this talk, and that's you should do this. Everything that you saw that I'm showing you here, you all have the ability to do that. The nice thing about it, think small. In our normal jobs, what we're trying to reach millions of people and make millions of dollars, otherwise we're a failure. Well, what if you reach 2 people and you made no money? In fact, it cost you $100 or so to reach those 2 people. Is that worth more to you? For me, I find it is. You can actually feel a different sense of satisfaction about that than you ever will having your game out all over the world and trying to generate ARPU and increase ad revenue and all this other stuff. Think long term. Like I said, a lot of our game design that we're forced to work with every day is rushed. There's these deadline. It's like, get rid of all that. Who cares? Just take your time, make it good. That's all that really matters. And then challenge yourself at work. A lot of times you want to do something experimental and you're not allowed to. It's like, that's too risky. That hasn't been proven to pay off. We would never do that. Where's the model? How much money are you going to generate back again? And here, just the opposite. It's like, you're making this for yourself. You might as well experiment. You might as well push boundaries. You might as well try new things. So keep those 3 things in mind, and I think you'll all do really well. You might not have kids of your own, but you probably have nephews, nieces, friends, spouses, girlfriends, boyfriends, like coworkers. It's really easy to do, as long as you just don't stress out and get in this mode that you're trying to make a game for Hasbro and send it out to the whole world. All right, so that's it. Thanks for letting me run over. Sorry about the next speaker. So I don't have time for questions, obviously, but probably run out into the hall and you can catch me there. All right, thank you.